Mm. Hey everybody, welcome back to my channel, the Crypto Damus Astrology channel. I'm Crypto Damus here from Crypto Damus World Headquarters on the Starship Enterprise. We're checking out the planets up close and personal. We've got a special guest with us today, one of my favorite astrologers, Dan Waits from the World Astrology Report. He's got a fantastic YouTube channel if you haven't checked it out already. Go ahead and check it out. We'll put his information certainly in the details of the video. Dan, thanks for joining us again today. What is this, your second or third time on my channel?
I think it might be my second time,
Second
but
time.
who's counting?
All right. Coming to us straight from the UK. Tell us a little bit about your work.
Well, I'm mostly focused on world astrology, and I think my approach mm, emphasizes planetary cycles, synodic cycles. I like to study what cycles have done in the past to try and figure out what's coming and what we can expect as the cycles go on. So that's really what I do, and that's mostly what I talk about on my channel.
Awesome. So carrying on the tradition of Richard Tarnas and that kind of historical approach to astrology, and of course, many other astrologers are doing that as well. But do a lot of great research. He does a lot of great research on his channel. And we're happy to have him back today. We're going to talk about some of the key astrological events of the next 2 months. In particular, we're going to start talking about the upcoming Kite Grand Trine alignment that happens within the first week of August. I'm going to go ahead and sort of throw that up here just on the software so that we can all just take a look at this alignment. So kites are really interesting. You know, they're very dynamic. Mars is going to fall into the 1 degree Libra. It's going to make a kind of a nasty opposition to Saturn and Neptune. This is also what's considered the opposition of the malefics, right? So it's not just any opposition. It's kind of has a nasty sort of a bitter taste to it, right? This is one of the more difficult, hard aspects that happens once every 2 years or so. You've got the conjunction of the malefics, and then about a year later, you get an opposition of the malefics. This often brings about sort of wars, epidemics, market sell-offs, and so forth like that. It's not a huge crisis aspect, like for instance, the Saturn-Pluto conjunction of March 2020 or January 2020. But it is kind of a smaller, short-term kind of crisis aspect. And in this case, it's opposing the Saturn and Neptune conjunction that's kind of going on in Aries, one of the big alignments of 2025. However, that's not the only story here. It's also making a grand trine with Uranus and Pluto, with Uranus in Gemini and Pluto in Aquarius. And Uranus and Pluto are in a historic trine alignment, the first one since the 1920s. And then there's also this minor, what we call a minor grand trine between the outer planets, between all of really four of the outer planets, Saturn, Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto. So for a couple of days in August, this is going to be a really dramatic alignment. And Dan, what are your thoughts on this? I mean, have you done any research on these type of alignments or just any of the sort of particular individual pieces in it? And what do you think is going to happen?
Well, it's a complicated configuration, and it's a pretty incredible piece of astrology, honestly, just to have those very powerful outer planets so tightly configured like that. I mean, we almost never see this. We haven't seen this for thousands of years. But I think the best way to try and understand it is to break it down into its constituent pieces and to just start off by thinking about that Mars Saturn opposition, which, as you rightly say, these are quite difficult alignments because we have the two so-called malefic planets here. They're both kind of life-denying planets. Mars, obviously hot and fast-moving. Saturn, cold and slow-moving. You know, Mars tends to want to move and cut things and burn things and so forth. And Saturn is more about denial and restriction and limits. And you put those two planets in an opposition, they're facing off against each other. And that can be quite tense. It can be quite explosive even because, great tension can lead to explosive events. And you're right to say that these aren't extremely significant in the sense of, or similar to kind of bigger alignments like, like as you say, the Saturn-Pluto conjunction and so forth, but they can carry some punch. They do tend to time like 2 year stories, and these oppositions can really be the kind of pinnacle of some sort of story of challenge or tension. I'll give you an example from 1962. In February of 1962, there was a conjunction of Mars and Saturn. At that time, the US put some sanctions on Cuba. At the opposition in October of 62, we saw the Cuban Missile Crisis. So really significant events can actually come at these alignments. And I'm not saying that's necessarily what we're going to see this August, but they can be quite significant, and especially this one because it's kind of jacked up with all these other outer planets involved in it. And now another way to break this down is to look at what's already happened in this Mars-Saturn cycle. That takes us back to April of 2024, which was when we saw the Mars-Saturn conjunction. And that was a pretty crazy month. And it was I think it was a time when we saw Israel and Iran enter into direct conflict with each other. They were exchanging attacks, and there was a lot of tension. Everybody was watching to see, what was going to come next. What response was Israel going to have? What response was Iran going to have? I think Iran ended up launching 300 missiles at Israel. Israel attacked Isfahan, which is where the Iranian nuclear program is. So at that time, you kind of saw some of these themes being set, and it was one of conflict, and it involved Israel and Iran. Now, if we look at the square of those two planets, Mars-Saturn square, this is the first hard aspect of that cycle. And it's a time when you'd expect to see the same themes that were set at the conjunction coming up again, but in a sort of a new way, a new expression of it, moving the story forward with some friction, tension, as is the nature of the square. And of course, at that time, Israel and Iran, they were attacking each other again. There was a lot of tension. The situation was very similar because Israel assassinated several Iranian leaders and I think a Hezbollah leader and so forth. And then there was all this tension about Iran potentially going to attack Israel again. The attack actually ended up coming quite a bit later. I think it was in October. So that it didn't actually turn into a conflict in the same way, but the themes were very much the same. The tension was very much the same, and the actors were the same. So you have to wonder if more conflict between Israel and Iran is a possibility for this, given what we've seen at the previous hard aspects. And I think the other theme that's come up with this cycle is nuclear technology. That is always running through the background of the Israel-Iran conflict, of course, as we all know by now. But at the same time, at the conjunction of Mars and Saturn back in April 2024, the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant was attacked. Both of the sides in the conflict accused the other of doing it. And then
Mm,
if you move to August at the waxing square, exactly the same thing happened again. The Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant was set on fire. So
mm, mhm.
something involving nuclear technology could be implicated here. And I noticed that we may already have seen something right now because we just had this massive earthquake and tsunami. And from what I understand, where the earthquake was in Kamchatka in Russia. And this is where the Russian nuclear fleet is. Nuclear submarines are based at a base in Kamchatka, the Kamchatka Peninsula. So who knows what's happened there? Because that's right at the epicenter of what's just happened, this massive earthquake. Fukushima nuclear power plant was evacuated in Japan as well, just over the past day because of this
Mhm.
tsunami
Oh,
warning.
wow.
So maybe we've seen an early expression of some of these themes, and from a hopeful perspective, maybe that's how these themes are going to be expressed this time. But we're still quite a way off the exact Mars-Saturn opposition, as you say. It's like August the 9th, so tension is actually building. So unfortunately, you have to worry that there's a lot more to come with this configuration.
Yeah, it's interesting that you mentioned the Middle East. I've been tracking sort of the conjunction and oppositions of the malefics literally for over a decade. And uh, they've often correlated with wars in the Middle East involving Israel. Going back, I remember yeah, I can't remember what it was, what year it was. Maybe it was like around 2015 or something like that. But there was that brutal war between Israel and Lebanon where I think that Hezbollah had kidnapped several Israeli border guards, and then Israel bombed Beirut back to the Stone Age, and that definitely correlated with either a conjunction or opposition of the malefics. We've also, I remember seeing some of the big Ebola outbreaks in Africa had also correlated to this aspect. So the hard aspects and the conjunctions, they can bring some pretty, some pretty grim events. I think we also saw, I think it was right after in 2022 after the Russia invaded Ukraine. We saw it was revealed of some of the Russian atrocities in the Ukraine. So that would have been in 2022. So that probably would have been in opposition also. But this year, I'm wondering if this is correlating with the situation in Gaza right now. And this is sort of like global outrage is coming to a boiling point over the situation in Gaza. I mean, it's at this point it's really hard to sort of not use the word genocide. I don't know what else you would call it at this point. I mean, I've sort of been hesitant to use that word. I think war crimes were being committed, but at this point, the situation, has become quite dire, and apparently many Palestinians are really starving. Maybe even in the millions. So this could correlate to a Mars Saturn hard aspect. This is kind of one of the top stories. The grim reality of the hunger crisis appears to be shifting public opinion, is the NBC News headline. And this isn't headlines in every major news outlet all around the world, right? The situation here. So, unfortunately, this is probably going to come to a head. Talk about a 2-year story, right? So that's one thing that we'll probably be seeing more. Unfortunately, we'll probably be seeing more headlines about that. Um,
Yeah, I'd just maybe like to add is we've seen this. Obviously, this stuff has been going on for a long time, right? It's not brand new, but we're really seeing outrage about the starvation that's happening in Gaza coming to a head right now, and that seems to have coincided with Mars in Virgo, and Virgo is the sign of the harvest, right? And so all the Earth signs, I think, but particularly Virgo and Taurus, you can link to food and the harvest. The
yeah,
image of Virgo is the Virgin holding an
right.
ear of wheat corn, um, and it does seem to be that pressure is really building and outrage is building, and maybe at this opposition we see like something gives, and maybe that's a turning point. I know that's a sort of hopeful perspective, but
Yeah.
we'll see.
Well, it's true. Also, this story's been building, since Mars sort of loosely started conjuncting the South Node, which the South Node also can kind of like relate to like a lack of something or not having enough of something, or a really dire situation of, yeah, nasty karmic situations. So that also is interesting. Having the South Node in the sign of agriculture of Virgo too, maybe playing a role there as well. Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't expect anything super favorable to come of this Mars Saturn opposition for the situation in Gaza. Only that maybe it somehow comes to a head, or like you said, maybe it's a turning point in some way. But I think things get worse before they get better. I mean, there's. Yeah, I mean it's a terrible situation, and it's kind of unbelievable really that nobody is doing anything to stop it. There's no real checks on Israel's power, and I don't even think a lot of Israelis support what's going on. I was just talking to a friend of mine in Israel, and she was outraged and said 80% of Israelis don't support Netanyahu's policies, especially on the war in Gaza, and that many people were refusing to serve and were going to prison. And we haven't really seen that much about that in the headlines. But two Israeli human rights groups actually, I'm going to look for the article here. actually for the first time declared a genocide in Gaza. And this is Israeli human rights groups. Let me see if I can find that story. Yeah, here we go from NPR. It was B'Tselem, which is one of the top human rights groups. So two Israeli human rights groups say their country is committing genocide in Gaza. This is the first time that Israeli human rights groups, okay, are now using the term genocide. So this is really, and this only just came out literally the other day on July 28th. Uh, the claims were B'Tselem and Physicians for Human Rights Israel add to the explosive debate over whether Israel military operation there amounts to genocide. So even, I think this is a real change in the situation when even Israelis themselves are using the term genocide. So yeah, I mean, I don't have a lot more to say about that. It's just a tragic situation, and all we can really do is sort of speak out about it and try to and I'm not against Israel. I'm not pro-Israel. I'm not against Israel. I believe in a two-state solution. I believe in Palestinian human rights and dignity and security for Israel, but this situation has just gone sort of beyond the pale. And it's just a shocking really that Israel was capable of doing this. But um, let's talk about some of there is a favorable component to this alignment, right? There's a Grand Trine in air also. And let's talk about that a little bit because the cool thing about the kite is that you've got three trines, right, which is what makes a minor grand trine in air. So this is an air grand trine. And then you also have the two sextiles, right? So there's only one hard aspect, which is the opposition, but a kite is actually two sextiles, three trines, and an opposition. So the opposition is held within a sort of favorable alignment of trines and sextiles. Do you see
Yeah.
anything positive here?
Well, before we talk about that, there is a bit more on kites that I came across in researching this configuration. There was an astrologer named Lynn Coyner who did quite a lot of research on kites. And again, this is not good news exactly, but what she found is that she saw a lot of charts for disaster events
Wow.
had kite configurations in them. I think one of
That's not
them.
what we wanted to hear, Dan.
I know. I'm sorry. I couldn't help myself. It's just before we get to before we try and turn this around and there is actually maybe a slightly sweet aspect to this. She saw that a lot of disasters had kite configurations, but what she also saw is that these tended to be disasters that led to change or led to reform
Hmm.
or led to demands for new structures and systems that will prevent this thing from happening again. And I think a couple of the examples she cites in her article were, I think the Challenger disaster was one of them, and maybe even the Oklahoma City bombing might have been another one, but I'd have
Hmm.
to I'd have to check
Interesting.
that.
Okay.
Yeah, so she said that there were changes made though. There were decisions made in the wake of these configurations to demand that things aren't done the same or like never again, that kind of thing.
Hmm.
Um, who knows? Like maybe the chorus of people demanding that Israel stop doing what it's doing gets so loud over
Hmm.
this period that something shifts. I mean, it's hard to imagine what would do that, given the absolute kind of imperviousness to criticism that Israel seems to have at the moment. But it's something you'd wonder based on that history with these kite patterns.
Well, France and the UK actually have sort of like peeled off a bit and are now stating that they're supporting a Palestinian state. So they're sort of, it's basically a middle finger to Israel for what they're doing. But yeah, I mean, with Trump, basically, I mean, Trump doesn't seem like he's going to stop Netanyahu. I think Netanyahu has calculated that Trump's not going to basically not try to, prevent him from doing whatever he wants to do. I mean, Biden was at least every once in a while would sort of like give him a bit of a tongue lashing and scold him a bit. And I think he held back a little bit of military aid here and there. But, Trump's basically just not going to do any of that. Um, So yeah, it's really hard to see what would change the situation here. Um,
Well, there is, I mean, I don't know if you want to get into this kind of stuff, but there's stuff happening in the US right now. I think with the whole Epstein case, which is interesting and may actually be looked back on as some kind of turning point, because it's quite clear that Epstein was running some kind of blackmail operation. A lot of people suggest it was a blackmail operation on behalf of Mossad, and that operation is kind of at the center of attention right now. But also, interestingly, from both sides of the political spectrum, right? You have like Democrats demanding that the files and the money, the information comes out, but you're
right,
also getting MAGA people saying the same thing, who are like pissed off that Trump has done this,
right.
crazy about turn and just suddenly gone, nothing to see here. What are you talking about? And so that's kind of an interesting thing when you see people from both sides, so to speak, kind of pinpointing this case and saying this, things need to change. And I think there's an element of kind of interesting revelation here, like with the Pluto and Uranus in air signs. I think getting a lot more understanding of how the world really works is something we can expect with these powerful planets moving through air signs. And that looks a little bit like what we might be seeing right now, because this is how the mechanisms of power work. This is how politicians are pushed into supporting certain policies. It's very interesting, and also has implications potentially for Israel as well.
Yeah, that's interesting. So you're talking about the Epstein files scandal right now, where President Trump had basically ran on the promise to release the so-called Epstein client list and the so-called Epstein files. And then once he got into power, he said, "Oh no, we're not going to release those. There's nothing to see there." And it caused an uproar within his own base, within the MAGA base. And it was kind of an interesting situation because his own sort of conspiracy theories about certain, especially about the Epstein files, seems to have come back to bite him in the ass. So it's been a kind of an interesting issue in the United States, and it won't seem to go away. And so he's tried to deflect attention, saying that there was actually a scandal about President Obama, which was completely false, trying to distract attention. And this Epstein files thing is really blown up in the media. Almost every day, there's a new angle on it in the news. Yeah, Trump has really been struggling to sort of get past this story. And so this is an interesting point that this also might come to a head during this kite alignment. Is that what you're saying?
Not necessarily in the kite alignment, but possibly. But it's for me, it's symbolic of a process of kind of the revelation of truth, new ways of seeing the world, new perspectives on politics and so forth. So I think, Pluto has that kind of revelatory, here's what's going on in the dark underbelly kind of sense to it. And I think that may be part of the story of the coming years, kind of revelations about how the system kind of has been working and proposals for reform.
Well, it's also interesting that story really blew up since Mercury went retrograde. I think Trump is really getting Mercury retrograded right now, pretty hard as the story keeps coming back in his face. Um, I just want to mention a couple other things about this alignment, specifically, Saturn and the Saturn Neptune conjunction in early Aries. I think is really correlated with the trade war and this whole the tariffs, that Trump is threatening against basically the entire world. Supposedly, they negotiated a deal over the weekend with the EU. However, I mean, deals that are made during Mercury retrograde almost seldom hold up in the long run. And there's already a lot of grumbling by some of the European countries that they don't like this deal already, and it's only 3 days old. So we may see some revisions to that deal. Supposedly, also, August 1st was the deadline that Trump gave for several different nations to come to an agreement on the tariffs. So now, supposedly, they kicked the can down the road with China, and they are continuing to negotiate. They've postponed the deadline for the China negotiation. This is just this shell game that Trump seems to be doing with the tariffs. It's always changing his mind and changing what he's saying. But August 1st, we're going to find out. But with I think that we're going to see some big news headlines about the trade war and tariffs. And I think it's going to be quite bad. There are going to be countries that get these really high tariffs, and so this is a big part of the story in the macroeconomic picture. We had the Fed meeting today. They did not raise interest rate. They did not cut interest rates. We saw some really good economic data come out today for the U.S. economy is looking quite strong. So there was no reason for them to cut. Also, the jobs report, U.S. jobs report, comes out on Friday. So this Friday is a very big day for a lot of news events. This is the following Friday. Now, interestingly, this Friday, actually, Venus will be squaring Saturn and Neptune. And then Mars is going to oppose Saturn and Neptune. However, I think if we take out, the opposition and we just look at the trine, I think we could, in the coming week or two, we could see some massive technological breakthroughs as this trine activates, makes that grand trine between Uranus and Pluto. Do you see anything on that angle?
I think so. One of the things I'm wondering about is do we see some kind of weaponry, maybe air-based weaponry? With
Mm,
Mars, the warrior planet in an air sign of Libra, making trines with Pluto, the planet of power, Uranus, planet of technological breakthroughs and so forth. So I'm wondering if we see some kind of high technology on display over the that period, kind of particularly around the Kite configuration going exact. Do we see evidence of new technology, new whatever it may
mhm.
be, missiles, missile
Yeah,
defense, drones, you
yeah.
know, all that sort of stuff? That's what I'd be on the lookout for.
Interesting. Yeah, that's a great point, especially in air signs. I think we can certainly look to some new drone technology, autonomous weaponized drones. I mean, Uranus, let's talk about this Uranus Pluto trine here for a bit, because this is going to continue all the way into really September. This is a long range trine, and this is what the first of what, five or six of these trines? I can't remember. Over the next 3 years, there's going to be a long series of trines between Uranus and Gemini, trining Pluto and Aquarius. We've talked about in my past videos, Pluto and Aquarius really representing massive technological change, including AI, especially AI, which really came up as soon as Pluto went into Aquarius. And then Uranus and Gemini, as Dan had mentioned to me personally before we started the video, correlated to the first ever really, large scale computer. So this is going to blow up. Also, in some of my research, what I found was really interesting was Uranus trining Pluto in the 1920s actually correlated to some big breakthroughs in quantum theory. And this really lines up with Albert Einstein got the Nobel Prize in physics in 1922, mostly for his work on quantum physics. There were also some other big breakthroughs in the study of the quantum physics. So this really aligns with my prediction that quantum computing is going to be the next big technological breakthrough and also an amazing investment opportunity that I've been talking about already since 2023. You'll have to check my Patreon market subscription service for those kind of specific information about which stocks we like and why. But the bigger point is that this is going to bring some big technological breakthroughs across the board in computing, AI, quantum, robotics, autonomous driving, because Gemini, of course, rules transportation and cars. I think we are going to finally see the era of robo-taxis, autonomous vehicles. We could see some breakthroughs in travel. I don't know if you saw that SpaceX is trying to get approval for intercontinental rocket service. So it would make a trip from New York to Tokyo 45 minutes instead of 13 hours. So we might see some big breakthroughs like this. as you said, we might see some breakthroughs in drone technology, specifically having to do with warfare. I mean, who knows? This could bring out the dark side of AI. We could see autonomous robot warriors, autonomous robot AI warriors. There's a dark side to Pluto, right? Pluto's the god of the underworld. Like, how are these technological breakthroughs? People are already saying either AI is going to either take all our jobs and completely destroy the economy, or it's actually just going to destroy all of humanity because it's going to become super conscious and sort of take over. So there's a lot of sort of theories about the dark side of these new technologies as well. So it'll be interesting in the next 2 weeks to see if we see any hints of this kind of, these kind of, really dystopian theories about these new technologies. I've been reading a lot about, is AI really going to take our jobs? It already is, actually. The data is showing that there's a lot less entry level jobs because AI is doing those entry level jobs that recent college grads used to be able to get. And so unemployment, it's not really showing up in the overall unemployment, but it is showing up for the younger generation. They're having a lot harder time getting jobs right now. So already we're starting to see some downside to AI. But the upside is if you're invested in Nvidia, it just made a new all-time high again this week. So for investing, there's a lot of new opportunities. I've been recommending Rocket Lab, which is competing directly against SpaceX. I've been recommending uh, flying helicopter taxis like Joby Aviation and Archer Aviation, which I think are going to be another, technological revolution. So technological breakthroughs with Uranus trining Pluto is going to make our head spin. It's going to happen so fast. I think the mantra is if you can't keep up, you're going to get left behind. So, we've all got to ask ourselves, how are we gonna adapt to this quickly changing world? So Mars really making that Grand Trine is sort of just highlighting this alignment right now. Do you have any thoughts about the technological breakthroughs? I know you've done a lot of research on these aspects.
Yes, I've done quite a bit, and a lot of the things you've already covered. But Uranus in Gemini was, as you mentioned, the first digital computer, the ENIAC, was invented at that time, but also the transistor. So we're coming to the Uranus return of the transistor, which is basically the development that enabled the digital revolution that we're living through now. One of the other things that I've seen, which is quite interesting, is to look at the Pluto-Neptune synodic cycle, because then Pluto and Neptune, as you've shown, are in a sextile, right? This is part of this minor Grand Trine configuration, the Pluto-Neptune sextile, but they've actually been in that sextile since the 1940s,
Yeah.
right? That's when they first got into orb. And over that time, at certain times, they've kind of moved further away from being in an exact sextile and then come back closer again. Now,
Look at that again. Yeah, so that's the
if you can
Pluto,
show that,
yeah,
yeah.
the Pluto Neptune component of the, whoops. So just isolating the Neptune Pluto sextile, and that has been, yeah, a very long term, almost a century.
Yeah, so Pluto and Neptune do this in their cycle because Pluto has a very elliptical orbit. So there are times where it's moving the same speed around the zodiac as Neptune. So they just stay in
Yeah.
aspect for a very long time, for 100 years at a time. They do that twice in their cycle. The first time is the waxing sextile, and the second time is the waning trine. And what I've come across recently is how both of those periods are times that historians look at
Mm,
as kind of real important historical processes. So what I mean by that, the Pluto-Neptune sextile in the previous cycle began in about 1450, almost exactly when the printing press was invented. And the sextile didn't end until about 1540, something like that, which is when the Protestant Reformation happened, which was driven by the printing press, right? So you had, people protesting against the corruption of the church, and their messages were getting spread around because of the printing press. So there's something interesting that happens because at the start of this sextile, you see an invention. You saw the printing press the last time. In our current cycle, you saw the transistor. And we're just now reaching the final phase of this sextile that began with the printing press. So one of the things I've been, wondering is, are we going to see some kind of revolution,
Mm.
which is obviously something you see with Pluto and Aquarius, that was kind of seeded with the invention of the transistor. So somehow that might bring about some kind of new reformation, and somehow technology is going to change us. In other words, it's going to change us, and it's going to change how we see the world, as the printing press did during the Protestant Reformation.
Interesting historical assessment. And you also said that the first computer was created in the 1940s too. Was that so? That would have been also the start of that
Yeah,
sextile.
yeah, yeah.
So there's a couple other things going on with this alignment that we should also just mention real quickly. Interestingly, 2 days later, after that kite, after the exact kite forms, you actually get the conjunction of the benefics, the annual conjunction of the lucky planets of Venus and Jupiter. Do you think that this mitigates, some of the destructive qualities of the opposition of the malefics?
No, I don't think it. I don't think it mitigates it because they're not. They're kind of disconnected from the configuration, right? They're here in Cancer, but they're not really connected to this kite configuration. So, the way that might play out is that there's some like difficult stuff happening in this part of life, but oh,
Mhm.
but this is nice because I made a new friend today.
Interesting. Yeah,
It,
and this
it,
this I mean, in terms of financial astrology, this might mitigate a market sell-off, in my opinion. We'll see. This seems to indicate kind of the bull market should continue. Also, that same day as the conjunction of the benefics, you also get the exact Saturn-Uranus sextile, and that one is also that's a very, very important cycle for financial astrology. All of the or many of the major financial crises of the past 125 years came under the hard aspects of Saturn and Uranus, and so the soft aspects typically bring bull markets. We saw this was very good in the trine of Saturn and Uranus in 2017. It was very good for Bitcoin and crypto. In the 1990s, there was also a trine. 1996, I think it was. There was either a trine or a sextile, and it was also the sort of dot-com boom was taking off there. So I'm somewhat optimistic for the financial markets as long as Saturn and Uranus are in that favorable alignment. But some sectors could get hit by that Mars-Saturn opposition, especially having to do with the trade war and tariffs. So certainly it's a mixed picture. It's a mixed bag. Now, as we go deeper into August, let's say we go, another week ahead, what starts to happen here in the middle of August is actually that you get, the partile minor Grand Trine, right? So Mars is now kind of moving on its way. The bigger kite configuration is now breaking up, but you still have the minor Grand Trine. And particularly between Pluto, Neptune, and Uranus, all go to 1 degree. So this is what we call partile sextiles and trines. So the minor Grand Trine actually intensifies, and that goes all the way into September. Um, this is personally, I think this is somewhat hopeful, right? At least it's trines and sextiles. Do you have any idea when the last time we saw a configuration like this was?
No, I think, well, in during the Protestant Reformation period, like I think it was the 16th century, there was something a bit like this, but it was nowhere, it wasn't partile. There was nothing anywhere near as kind of perfectly formed as this, with these waxing cycles. I think you have to go back thousands of years. I haven't really found another
Hmm,
example, actually.
interesting.
So it's pretty incredible astrology. One of the observations I have about it is just that you can understand a little bit about this by just breaking it down again
Sure.
into its constituent pieces. And the Neptune Uranus cycle is also pretty interesting. And so, if we want to figure out what this sextile is doing, we can think about what this cycle was about. And it began in 1993. That's when Uranus and Neptune made three conjunctions in Capricorn.
Hmm.
And if you look at what happened at that time, okay, we had the World Wide Web was born around that time. Became public in '93, I believe. So some sort of new iteration of the web is kind of one of the things I think we're seeing at this time with this sextile. And one of the other things that actually I've been focused a lot on my channel is UFO disclosure or the UFO phenomenon. Because in 1993, Stephen Greer launched the Disclosure Project, which was this project to get all these whistleblowers in government projects, military, and so forth, to reveal what they had seen, what they knew about this phenomenon and government's efforts to understand it. So that began right at the start of that cycle, and I think it does have the ring of Uranus and Neptune. Like Neptune being, having to do with sort of difficult to understand things like the ineffable, the spiritual, the mystical, things that, are maybe sort of not necessarily connected to the realm that we live in. And then Uranus being this planet of revelation and sudden changes and developments and so forth. So I think sort of something about kind of disclosure of the reality of this phenomenon in some sense is one of the things that we're seeing as a part of this Uranus Neptune sextile. And if there's quite a lot of really crazy stuff happening right now that I've been following, like exactly having to do with disclosure of the existence of this phenomenon. One of the things I was telling you about just before we spoke was this new study that's been put out by astronomers at
Hmm.
the University of Stockholm. And what they've done is they've looked at a lot of old plates uh, showing images of the sky in the 1950s. And what they've found is hundreds or even thousands of what they call transients, which are
Hmm.
lights that are seen in one image, but then they're gone the next. They're not stars. They're images that are there one moment and gone the next. And they've found so much of this. And what they've also found is that the frequency of occurrence of these, what they're calling transients, is correlated to nuclear testing, number one, and UFO flaps. For example, the 1952 sources over Washington incident in July of that year, it was correlated to a lot of transients spotted in these plates. So
Hmm.
there's some really
Hmm.
interesting stuff that's not being widely reported, but I think is going to end up being seen as very important that's coming out right now. And I think it's part of what this minor grand trine is bringing us.
All right, you heard it here, folks. So we're going to have alien, confirmation of alien civilizations in August of 2025. Um, that's some interesting information. One thing I literally just noticed as we were talking is that, this is sort of foreshadowing the July 2026 alignment, right? That some people are calling the basket, or I don't know if S.J. Anderson coined that term, but Venus will fall into that 1 degree Leo, and it will actually mimic the basket that forms in July 2026 when Jupiter will move into Leo, and they'll all actually make this same configuration at 4 degrees. So we might be getting an advanced sort of appetizer for 2026 when this minor grand alignment, really minor grand trine alignment, will continue into and culminate, I think, in July of 2026, right, with that 4 planet alignment of air and fire. So this is a really unique configuration, and I think, hopefully it will bring some positive and hopeful events over in late August, towards the end of the summer. And again, I think it will be generally favorable. Maybe we won't get that sort of summer sell-off in the market that we often get as this alignment sort of comes. I forget. I don't know. I forget when it's exactly the most close, but it does go all the way into about mid September. We were going to talk about some other stuff, but man, I think we've gone on for quite some time here. So why don't we just wrap it up and kind of just like, why don't we just leave it for just August? I think it'd be too much information to bring in. We were going to maybe talk about the eclipses, but I think we're going to save that for another time. This has just been so much different. so much information to sort of process and think about. Anything else you wanted to add about just August?
I think we've talked about a lot of it. You know, I mean, you let me go off piece there and talk about UFOs. And I do genuinely
That is your
think
brand.
it is my brand, and I'm bringing it to your channel now as well. So it's it's something that I genuinely believe is going to be like increasingly talked about. This configuration that we've been looking at, this minor Grand Trine, it's not business as usual. Like whatever it is going to be quite mind blowing, I think. And this is one of the things I've been tracking with these individual cycles that are kind of pointing to this. This is a sort of once every few thousand years kind of astrology, and
Yeah.
so I think we need to be like and I think a lot of us can kind of see that, right? There are really odd kind of new things happening in all sorts of spheres right now, and even just AI. I mean, to have like okay, it's not perfect and it has a lot of problems, and I'm sort of suspicious of it in many ways. But to have made machines where you can ask them a question and they'll answer any question you want. Okay, sometimes they get it wrong, but a lot of the time they get it, right, and they can give you very intelligent, well-formulated answers. I mean, that is pretty incredible already. So we're already living in a pretty amazing moment in time, whether or not you look at the astrology. But I think just sort of expecting really remarkable events is a reasonable policy at this particular time in history.
Do you think that aliens are, friendly to the people of Earth, or do you think that they are unfriendly, or do you think there's a mixture of maybe different types of aliens from different cultures and different planets that have different agendas?
Yeah, I would expect that it's probably something more like that. And I'm not sure that they're necessarily even aliens, right? We've been seeing things in the sky for hundreds, if not thousands of years. They seem to be appearing in a kind of technological sort of format right now, but these things go back way back in time. And I think if they were a threat, they would have dealt with us already, right? They wouldn't have. We start seeing UFOs in the 1940s, and I don't see why they would have just let us kind of get more and more technologically advanced and developed better and better weapons if they were a threat to us. So I'm not really convinced by that. I think it's probably whatever it is a lot probably weirder and harder for us to understand than you might expect. I don't think we can really expect that our kind of normal human motivations can be just transferred to whatever this phenomenon happens to be.
Yeah, supposedly, I mean, the naval aviators, they've witnessed, the flights of these alien spacecraft that seem to defy the laws of aerodynamics and physics as we know it. So we're talking about, some kind of a technology that's just so far ahead of us that it doesn't even obey what we consider to be the universal laws of the universe. So it's interesting. Yeah, it's interesting to keep an eye on this story. Are you a fan of Graham Hancock and his kind of stuff like that?
I am. I'm
Yeah.
a, I'm a fan of Graham Hancock. Yeah,
Yeah, he talks
and
about aliens playing a big role in the evolution of human societies and so ancient societies and so forth.
well,
So
actually, it's more that's more Eric von Däniken, I think, who's on that. But like Graham has definitely done a lot to promote the idea that there is a mystery to the pyramids and to a lot of these ancient sites, and that they
mhm,
clearly knew
mhm,
knew much more than we
mhm,
give them credit for,
mhm.
which I agree
Totally.
with.
All right. And also, I know you've talked about in the past where Pluto and Aquarius has correlated with the meeting of very distant civilizations. Marco Polo's trip to China probably was one of the most famous. So yeah, maybe in the next 20 years there will be certainly new revelations about aliens. I mean, some people say that we already have alien technology that's been, used by the, US government to reverse engineer certain technologies. But we don't really know for sure. So yeah, this is an interesting subject. Dan's covered this a lot on his channel. He's kind of an expert in astrological correlations with sort of the alien, the mystery of the aliens. So, well, thanks for joining us. Why don't you tell us if you have do you have any big events coming up or anything And just about your work generally, or do you have any classes or workshops or webinars or anything like that?
I give monthly live streams to my members who subscribe to my website, worldastrologyreport.com. And they tend to be on all sorts of different subjects. Like sometimes they're astrological techniques, sometimes they're thematic. And we kind of go deep into different subjects and bring up a lot of kind of historical correlations and try to understand where things are going, basically. And so I'm not doing anything new, but I do that every month.
Every month.
And I'm on Substack as well. I'm trying to write a bit more. So you can find me World Astrology Report on Substack as
Exactly.
well.
Excellent. As you guys know, you can find me at www.astrocryptoreport.com. And it's got all my information there. I have a Patreon subscription service for financial markets, especially S&P 500. We cover about 20 different stocks as well as Bitcoin and cryptocurrencies. I'm doing a webinar on September 21st with Gianni Depocci, who is the sort of disciple of Ray Merriman, the legendary financial astrologer. That one I haven't put, we don't have the registration up yet, but you'll be hearing more about that workshop. Okay, Dan Waits, thanks so much for joining us today. That was some really great information. I always enjoy collaborating with you. And I was just appeared on your channel, what was it, about 2 months ago or a month ago or so? And we talked a lot about some of the bigger alignments of 2025, and that was awesome. So we look forward to having you back again in the future. There's always going to be a lot to talk about. We've got the Saturn Neptune conjunction at zero Aries coming in February 2026. That's really the next really big alignment. That's a possible crisis, black swan event. We don't really know what it's going to bring. We just know that zero Aries is a very powerful point for any kind of outer planet alignment. So maybe we'll have you come back and talk about that in a few months. And I hope everybody's having a great summer. Hope you're getting to the beach, going up into the mountains. Take some time off, enjoy your family, and enjoy the summer. And we'll keep you informed on the astrological alignments that are coming up. Thanks again for joining us today. And Dan, once again, thanks a lot for coming on.
Thanks for having me, Robert.